Salam sejahtera, anda bersama Sinar Huda dalam Pantau Kerajaan Baharu. Sebelum kita ke perbincangan untuk jam ini, kita mulakan dengan beberapa laporan. Kementerian Komunikasi dan Digital memberi hint atau petunjuk akan menerima peruntukan khusus dalam Belanjawan 2023 bagi memperkukuhkan keselamatan cyber dan data pribadi dalam negara. Tanpa memperincikan dengan jelas, Menterinya Fahmi Fadzil berkata perkara itu diharap diumumkan Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim pada sesi pembentangan belanjawan yang dijadualkan esok.
InsyaAllah kita harap akan dapat diumumkan oleh Yang Berhormat Tambun esok adalah penekanan pihak kerajaan tentang aspek keselamatan cyber, di mana saya lihat ada keperluan bagi agensi-agensi kerajaan, malah juga kerajaan-kerajaan negeri memperuntukkan sejumlah daripada mungkin apa yang ada dari segi belanjawan tahunan, terutama aspek IT bagi tujuan keselamatan data. Dan di sini saya lihat perlu ada satu penyelarasan dari segi undang-undang.
Beliau menjawab soalan tambahan Datuk Nik Muhammad Zawawi Saleh PN Pasir Putih yang mahu tahu apakah tindakan baru yang sedang dan akan dilakukan oleh kementerian bagi meningkatkan tahap keselamatan siber. Mengulas lanjut, Fahmi PH Lembah Pantai berkata aspek penting yang turut diberi tumpuan ialah melibatkan dasar kriptografi bagi memastikan ketirisan data dan pengkodaman dapat dielakkan. Selain itu, kerajaan sedang meneliti untuk mewujudkan suruhanjaya keselamatan siber bagi menangani segera isu kerentanan keselamatan siber. Jelas beliau, suruhanjaya tersebut misalnya merangkumi Agensi Keselamatan Siber Negara NACSA dan Cyber Security Malaysia serta badan-badan lain. Perdana Menteri yang juga Menteri Kewangan, Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim akan membentangkan Belanjawan 2023 yang disemak semula di Dewan Rakyat pada 24 Februari.
Seterusnya, Kementerian Sumber Asli, Alam Sekitar dan Perubahan Iklim mengakui kadar tarif air yang terlalu rendah mungkin menjadi punca rakyat tidak menghargai sumber asas itu sehingga mengakibatkan penggunaan yang berlebihan. Menurut Menterinya Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad, penggunaan air di Malaysia dikategorikan sebagai sangat tinggi dan sukar diubah kerana sudah menjadi tabiat masyarakat. Justru beliau tidak menolak kemungkinan kerajaan akan mengkaji keperluan menaikkan tarif air domestik sebagai usaha untuk menangani isu pembaziran air.
Penggunaan air kita memang sangat-sangat tinggi. Jadi itu satu perkara yang mungkin mengambil masa sebab itu soal habits, soal kebiasaan kita. Dan mahu tidak mahu, dan ini keputusan yang telah diambil dan dimaklumkan oleh kerajaan sebelum ini juga tentang soal tarif air. Ya, jadi bila soal tarif air itu terlalu rendah, ia memberi tekanan kepada syarikat air dan juga melahirkan sikap yang mungkin tidak menghargai air di kalangan rakyat kita. Dan tahun lepas telah diluluskan di bawah kerajaan sebelum ini untuk dinaikkan dahulu bukan domestik tarif, dan kemudian peringkat seterusnya mengkaji semula tarif-tarif domestik. Jadi itu secara jujur antara perkara yang kita perlu ambil maklum untuk kita atasi masalah ini.
Pelaksanaan Peraturan Produk Bebas Penebangan Hutan EU ataupun EUDR oleh Kesatuan Eropah EU akan meningkatkan kos pengeluaran produk komoditi negara. Timbalan Perdana Menteri Datuk Seri Fadilah Yusof berkata, pelaksanaan itu juga akan menjejaskan tahap daya saing produk komoditi negara.
Beliau yang juga Menteri Peladangan dan Komoditi berkata kementerian berpandangan bahawa EUDR adalah satu bentuk kawalan bukan tarif terhadap produk agri-komoditi Malaysia. Menurutnya, isu EUDR juga telah dibawa ke peringkat ASEAN melalui hubungan diplomatik dengan negara-negara pengeluar agri-komoditi serantau.
Dengan suara yang lebih besar, saya kira kita akan dapat memperjuangkan secara bersama dari segi untuk memahamkan European Union ini bahawa kita mengambil langkah bersama-sama untuk memelihara alam sekitar kita. Dan apa saja tindakan yang mereka ambil akan sudah pasti memberi kesan kepada pekebun-pekebun kecil khususnya. Sebab ianya meningkatkan kos pengeluaran, kos melakukan bisnes dan sebagainya. Sebab itu kita kena melakukan interaksi ini. Di samping itu kita juga akan membuat kempen untuk menentang aturan EUDR ini. Ini akan dibuat secara tersusun.
Beliau berkata demikian sebagai menjawab soalan Datuk Andi Muhammad Suryandi Bandi yang mahu tahu mengenai usaha yang telah dilaksanakan kementerian bagi menangani isu EUDR. Timbalan Perdana Menteri itu turut menegaskan pendirian Malaysia untuk bergerak sebagai sebuah blok bagi memberi tekanan terhadap pelaksanaan EUDR.
Baik, semalam Kerajaan Thailand dan Barisan Revolusi Nasional Melayu Patani ataupun BRN mencipta sejarah apabila mencapai persetujuan untuk membentuk Pelan Komprehensif Kerjasama ke Arah Pendamaian atau JCPP. Dan pelan itu sebagai hala tuju untuk tahun 2023 hingga 2024 ke arah kedamaian di selatan Thailand. Persetujuan itu diumumkan Tan Sri Zulkifli Zainal Abidin yang baru dilantik sebagai Ketua Fasilitator Kerajaan Malaysia bagi proses dialog damai di selatan Thailand. Ia susulan mesyuarat rasmi ke-6 proses dialog damai pada 21 dan 22 Februari di Kuala Lumpur.
The JCPP establishes a roadmap that shows there is hope for peace for the Patani community in the southern border provinces of Thailand, and there is an opportunity to end the conflict.
Bagi mengekalkan momentum, kedua-dua belah pihak akan meneruskan usaha melalui rundingan tertutup. Butiran pelaksanaan pelan JCPP juga akan diperincikan dalam beberapa mesyuarat teknikal dalam masa terdekat. Menurut pejabat fasilitator, Malaysia sentiasa komited dalam memudah cara kerajaan Thailand dan komuniti Patani di selatan Thailand untuk menyelesaikan konflik serta berharap supaya penyelesaian adil dan komprehensif dapat dicapai. Baik, untuk jam ini kita nak bincangkan lebih lanjut mengenai dengan usaha untuk mengekalkan momentum dalam dialog damai selatan Thailand, dan sudah bersedia untuk mengulas dengan lebih lanjut bersama saya ketika ini Altaf Deviyati yang merupakan pengarah urusan Iman Research. Dan izinkan saya teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Thank you Altaf for joining me today. Firstly, what do you make of the agreement that we witnessed between the Thai government and the BRN yesterday?
Thank you for having me. What do I make of the agreement? Well, definitely it is a positive step considering the recent history and the rumored discontent that we've been having for quite some time. So it is definitely a good show of togetherness and a step forward in agreeing to come up with a so-called roadmap, a roadmap on the dialogue itself. So definitely positive.
So, taking into account this positive step, what exactly has changed in the peace process leading towards this? Because we know for a fact that there's the new Malaysian facilitator appointed to mediate the peace talks, the dialogue, and there's also, the new Malaysian leadership leading this under Anwar Ibrahim. But how much of those things actually lead to this early success, and what could be the other factors? What exactly changed?
Well, I think we can't deny the fact that the change in government in Malaysia and Anwar Ibrahim coming on as the Prime Minister had a significant impact. I just recently came back from Bangkok, and the mood, when I was discussing with some officers as well, the mood is very positive. And why does it matter? I think the persona of Anwar Ibrahim himself was one big difference. He is well known in both communities and seen as a friend to both communities. When I say both communities, I mean down south and as well as in Bangkok. Both, so there is already a certain form of rapport. So building on that rapport, we were able to move forward. Because like it or not, it is in a way we are still somehow in this trust building phase. We still haven't really gone beyond that. And the trust building is not just within the two parties involved, but Malaysia as well as a facilitator. So, so I think that is one of the key changes that had helped to influence the peace dialogue.
Yeah, you mentioned trust building just beyond the two main parties involved. But if we're seeing just today, following what Tan Sri Zulkifli Zainal Abidin said, he called for more inclusivity in the peace talks. We're now looking at the key group Mara Patani, who've just announced that they're also ready to join the peace talks alongside BRN. This was just confirmed today by their spokesperson, Dr. Abu Hafiz, to news channel Thai BBS. So what do you make of this? I mean, we're talking about peace building and negotiations beyond, formal negotiations, beyond the main parties involved. So now we're looking at Mara Patani. Who actually is this group, and what does this mean?
Okay, first of all, I think we need to understand about what kind of peace are we looking at here. I think peace cannot just be the absence of violence. It has to be something that is sustainable and brings a positive well-being, economic growth, and builds the community. So we're talking about sustainable peace. And for sustainable peace to happen, we really need all stakeholders involved to be at the table. Currently, we only have two. BRN, who is the most the biggest or the most significant insurgent group in the south, and of course the government. But there are other actors involved. I mean, there are even other groups that are involved, and I have also military wing in the south. Not to mention, there's also a significant number of civil society involved who are working on peace building. So eventually, I think if you want this peace dialogue to be sustainable and comprehensive, we need to bring those players on board. The problem is, again, is whether this is something that the South also needs to address. And I think BRN also needs to address that they need to share the table on the South with other parties that are relevant to the conflict and to acknowledge that. And I think what Malaysia can do is probably try to encourage that. But at the end of the day, there's the parties involved that has to make this decision.
Talking about inclusivity at the table, who are the other groups that must be involved in these negotiations? If we're naming names, I mean, who are these groups and why must they be involved?
I mean, I really don't want to specifically say, because it is rather, it's a discourse that is happening on the ground, but there are definitely a lot more groups fighting for independence in the South. BRN just happens to be the strongest one at the moment. And but as you've already mentioned, Marapatani itself is actually an umbrella body of a number of smaller groups who have converged together. Previously, but they've not been that dominant and recently. Of course, you had the Pulo movement and so forth. But apart from all that, you also have very strong non-profit movements that are working with the community on the ground. And these people should also be engaged, or at least have some form of observer status. Because that's also another thing when you're talking about inclusivity. You have the parties involved, but the observer status for the dialogue is also quite important. And currently, there's only 2 observers on the table. And if I'm not mistaken, they're from Norway and the UK. So we're not even having a regional presence there either. So since they're talking about inclusivity, I think it should go and become as inclusive as possible to ensure sustainable plan and comprehensive one can come out.
Yeah, so following from the Joint Comprehensive Plan Towards Peace, or the JCPP, what can we expect next?
Well, clearly the ball is actually in both Thailand, Bangkok, and BRN's court. I think the smaller technical committee is becoming very key. I think that's very key, because those are where the nitty-gritty details are coming out. So it is important that the technical committee comprises of really relevant, not only relevant, but organizations or people that has the substance to help define that. But then again, Malaysia is only a facilitator. We're not exactly a mediator. And our terms of reference are very vague. I think we don't even have anything exactly written on terms of reference. So we also Malaysia unfortunately has to play a very sensitive balancing act of encouraging and trying to lead, but at the same time not imposing, because you have to respect the 2 parties who are the key ones that are negotiating. So again, I would say that it is the 2 parties, and how they will and what the technical committee, who will comprise of the technical working committees to come up with the more detailed parts of the plan will be very important.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there needs to be this balancing act played by the Malaysian role in this negotiation. But I do want to talk about that a little bit more after we take a short break. Kita akan bergerak seketika, kita akan kembali selepas ini. Betul, kembali dalam Pantau Kerajaan Baharu dan untuk jam ini saya masih lagi bersama dengan Altaf Deviyati yang merupakan pengarah Urusan Iman Research membincangkan mengenai dengan usaha untuk mengekalkan momentum dalam dialog damai di selatan Thailand, dan izinkan kami teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris. Altaf, earlier you was talking about this balancing act that needs to be played by the Malaysian leadership in the peace dialogue. But what can be done specifically by the Malaysian leadership, especially taking into account the new leadership under Anwar's leadership, the new government? How can they ensure this momentum keeps on going?
Well, I think one I'll just say is the first one is what the facilitator is already doing. I think his outreach to the stakeholders involved, both in Bangkok and the South, and the trips that he's made, and I hear he's going to make another trip down south,
Yes.
is not only positive, but I think this sends the right signal that Malaysia is serious. We are a trusted neighbor, and we're a trusted friend. And I think that is quite crucial due to the recent history that we've had that had undermined that form of trust. But beyond that, I think there has to be some ways to address in helping to bridge the differences within the stakeholders in the peace panel itself. I know that some other observers of those who have been following the situation in the South have talked about things like the brain trust and so forth. I think those things need to be done. However, is that Malaysia's role or not, that can still be debated since it's a facilitator, but it should help to facilitate the building of a brain trust, for instance, for the BRN to help with the negotiation. Because we can't deny that there is a significant difference. One is a state body with all the mechanisms of a state, and the other isn't. And if you do not address the inequality, you don't get a good dialogue. You don't get a sustainable discussion or a plan that can move forward where all parties are happy.
Earlier you said how, it also boils down to how we define peace and what kind of peace we want to see in the South, right? And it's not just the absence of violence that we want to see. So perhaps here it's also worthwhile talking about some of the common interests shared by the leading facilitators or the leading parties involved in the peace process. If we're talking about the Thai government and the BRN, beyond the absence of violence, what could they share some similarities in terms of the vision, or what would they like to see in the South in the future?
I mean, one key thing that we in Malaysia and Thailand in general already share is that we believe in the economic prosperity of border communities, the economic prosperity of the border states of Malaysia and of Thailand. And we're already having significant plans to invest significantly in bringing up economic trade, which we hope to have spillover effects towards the community. However, we can't talk about economic trade and building up of border communities without looking at the situation in the 3 provinces in the South. To me, that's quite impossible because it's not sustainable. If only the other areas that are receiving the benefits, but not those 3 areas, then they are not going to have lasting peace. The violence will continue, but beyond that, community resentment will go intergenerational. That is not something that we would like to see. Other examples all over the world, you have seen how violence, if left unaddressed in border areas, only makes it worse. And the difference with Malaysia and Thailand is we do have a good economic and also community relationship in the border areas. But in order to actually make it holistic, we need to address this issue of Patani. And for it to be addressed, when I talk about sustainable peace, you need to address the issues that are being brought by the South and find a way to coexist while also addressing the red lines of both areas, of both Bangkok and the South. And to address the red lines, you need to have a whole inclusive negotiation. Yep. Without that, it'll just be temporary. It won't be a continued, everlasting, sustainable peace.
You did mention that risk of resentment growing in the community. Has the issue of trust deficit within the Southern Thai community improved over the years? What's the perception like on the ground now?
Before the issue of the South, I think resentment is still there. There is still a lot of anger, and the violence and on both sides are still very much relevant. And one example that I could give that I think really shows where of this is the number of youths that actually migrated to work in Malaysia from the south instead of going up north to Bangkok or so forth is significant. And this is one of the studies that Iman did. It may have gone down slightly because of COVID, but prior to COVID and even now, the numbers are slowly going up again. So that just shows that there are, if you're seeing a significant number of youths leaving an area, that does show either they don't believe that they have a place there or they don't see a future there. So I think that is still an issue. However, and it hasn't just gone because we got a new facilitator, because there is now a renewed hope to the peace process. I think it's still going to take some time to address that, and it has to be more concrete examples that has to happen on the ground in the south. And when I say concrete, it's beyond. It's one of definitely reduction of violence. Second, perhaps. Gazetted special economic zones for the south, but this could only happen as the peace process moves along.
You did also mention how observer countries in the peace dialogue could also play a more active role, or perhaps could possibly be roles that could be played by other Southeast Asian countries or any other country in the region. If what you say, the current observer countries or observer seats are taken up by countries like the UK or Norway, if we're looking at sort of more cooperation between Southeast Asian countries or ASEAN countries, member states, which do you think could possibly play a role in this, if we're talking about other Southeast Asian countries or other ASEAN member states?
The two observers currently on there actually are non-profit organizations, but from the UK and from Norway. I think it's common for any kind of peace negotiation to have observers. It gives depth, and it also gives, it allows some form of oversight as well. And also observing entities can also give some kind of, how do I say this? More professionalism or more strength towards the peace process. The thing about the current peace dialogue is that it's very secretive, as you can say, and this doesn't help because it's even secretive to people in the south. So if you have more representation in the even at the observer level, that at least can help build trust towards the process itself, which is I think needs, because I think one of the questions if you do go and ask down south is how much trust do they have the peace process? It's still a vague answer because very few people understand what's happening in the process. So by having more participation, it does trickle down the information and also allows for in one way or another, differing views to somehow also go into that process, which is important.
Right. Now, we just have about a minute left, but just to wrap things up, we are talking about this issue in the context of the new government. I mean, the program is called Pantau Kerajaan Baharu. So, obviously there's a lot of anticipation, a lot of excitement around this, looking at the new leadership and whatnot. But what's the main thing to take away for this, for the Malaysian government moving forward?
I think one thing is clear is I think this new government seems to be more serious and is investing in strengthening the peace dialogue, and this is important. And I think we need to observe on how they're going to strengthen further the process and ensure somehow to be more inclusive and the information reaching out to all relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, all right. Thanks so much. Plenty more we'd like to discuss, but that's all the time that we have. Thanks, Altaf. Itu tadi Altaf Deviyati,
Thank
Pengarah
you.
Urusan Iman Research, sudi kongsikan pandangan mengenai dengan usaha untuk mengekalkan momentum dalam dialog damai di selatan Thailand. Dan itu saja untuk jam ini bersama saya, Naila Huda. Salam hormat.